Have you ever looked at someone you cared about and realized the hardest battle wasn't between two people, but inside your own heart? Sometimes the biggest mistakes don't begin with lies. They begin with silence, with emotions left unspoken, and with the dangerous belief that one more secret won't change anything. Today's story is about love, trust, temptation, and the choices that slowly pull people away from the lives they thought they wanted. If you enjoy emotional relationship stories, true-style drama, and character-driven storytelling, stay with me until the very end, because this story takes turns that no one sees coming. The message that changed everything was only 6 words long. I couldn't take it all, Adam. When I saw those words on my phone, I assumed it was the end of a conversation. I was wrong. The next line made my heart stop. But I still wanted more. It wasn't a confession of happiness. It wasn't a declaration of love. It was the beginning of a truth that would leave every relationship involved standing on fragile ground. My name doesn't matter as much as what happened, because stories like this happen more often than people admit. They don't always make headlines, and they don't always end with shouting or dramatic scenes. Sometimes they unfold quietly, hidden behind polite smiles, family dinners, busy work schedules, and ordinary routines. From the outside, everything appears normal. Inside, emotions grow heavier every single day until someone finally reaches a breaking point. Adam wasn't the kind of person who demanded attention. He was thoughtful, dependable, and the friend everyone trusted when life became complicated. That quiet confidence made people feel safe around him. But even the strongest people carry burdens that no one else can see. As months passed, the lines between friendship, loyalty, and emotional dependence became increasingly difficult to recognize. No one intended for things to become complicated. Yet every conversation that lasted a little longer and every shared secret created a connection that neither of them fully understood. Looking back now, I can see the warning signs. They weren't dramatic or obvious. They were small moments that seemed harmless at the time. A conversation that felt unusually personal. A message sent late at night. A smile that lingered a little too long. The kind of moments people convince themselves don't really mean anything. But emotions rarely stay small when they are ignored. This isn't a story that glorifies betrayal. It's a story about consequences, emotional conflict, and the difficult decisions people face when honesty arrives too late. Every choice has a cost, and every secret leaves a mark, even if no one notices it at first. That's what makes this relationship story different. It isn't about villains and heroes. It's about flawed people trying to understand feelings they never expected to have. If you've ever questioned your own decisions, wondered how trust can slowly fade, or asked yourself whether one honest conversation could have changed everything, you'll understand why this story feels so personal. Every chapter reveals another piece of the puzzle, and every answer raises an even bigger question. Was this emotional connection simply misunderstood? Were boundaries crossed without anyone realizing it? Or had the truth been hiding in plain sight from the very beginning? As the days passed, the tension became impossible to ignore. Friends noticed subtle changes. Conversations became shorter. Eye contact became more difficult. There was a growing sense that something important remained unsaid. No one knew exactly what it was, but everyone could feel it. Then one unexpected evening brought a conversation that neither of them had prepared for, a conversation that would force impossible choices and expose emotions that had been buried for far too long. What happened next changed every relationship involved. One decision opened a door that could never be closed again. One confession challenged everything they believed about loyalty, trust, and love. And just when it seemed the truth was finally about to come out, an unexpected interruption stopped everything before the most important words could be spoken. Adam looked up, took a slow breath, and reached for his phone. The screen lit up with a new message from someone neither of them expected to hear from at that exact moment. His expression changed instantly. Without saying a word, he stood up and quietly whispered, "You need to see this." That single message would reveal a secret neither of them was prepared to face, and it would change the direction of this story forever. Adam didn't answer right away. He simply handed me the phone. My hands felt heavier than they should have as I looked at the screen. The message wasn't long, but it carried the kind of weight that changes the way you see everything. It read, "We need to talk tonight. No more hiding the truth." There was no explanation, no details, just those few words. I looked back at Adam, hoping he would tell me what it meant, but his face gave nothing away. For the first time since I had known him, he looked genuinely uncertain. The silence between us lasted longer than either of us expected. Outside, life carried on as if nothing had happened. Cars passed by, neighbors laughed across the street, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked. It was strange how ordinary the world could feel while everything inside me was beginning to fall apart. I wanted answers, but I was also afraid of what those answers might be. Adam finally spoke in a quiet voice. "I never wanted things to become this complicated." Those words only added more questions. Complicated how? Was he talking about our friendship, the growing emotional distance, or something that had been hidden long before I noticed anything was wrong? Every possibility seemed worse than the last. Looking back, I realized this story hadn't started with that message. It had started months earlier with small changes that were easy to ignore. We had always trusted each other. We shared stories about work, family, and the little struggles of everyday life. That openness made us feel comfortable. But somewhere along the way, our conversations became more personal. We started relying on each other during difficult moments, convincing ourselves we were simply being supportive friends. Neither of us crossed obvious lines, at least not in the beginning. That was what made everything so confusing. Emotional boundaries don't disappear overnight. They fade little by little until you can't remember where they once stood. A longer conversation here. A thoughtful message there. A habit of turning to one person before anyone else. None of it seemed important until it all added up. There was another person at the center of this story, though they had no idea how much their life was about to change. They trusted us completely. They believed the friendships around them were honest and unbreakable. That trust made the growing tension even harder to face. As the evening drew closer, I couldn't shake the feeling that the message was only the beginning. Whoever had sent it knew something neither of us had admitted out loud. And before the night was over, one long-kept secret would force everyone to question what they believed was true. The drive to the meeting place felt longer than it really was. Neither of us played music, and neither of us tried to fill the silence with small talk. Every few minutes I caught myself looking at Adam, hoping he would finally explain everything. Each time, he kept his eyes on the road, as if he was searching for the right words but couldn't find them. The quiet between us said more than any conversation could. I kept replaying the past in my mind. There were moments that suddenly looked different. The times Adam seemed distracted during family gatherings. The conversations he ended the moment someone else entered the room. The thoughtful messages that once felt comforting now carried a different meaning. Maybe I had misunderstood everything. Or maybe I had ignored the signs because believing the truth would have been much harder. Adam finally broke the silence. "There were so many chances to be honest," he said softly. "Every time I thought about telling the truth, I convinced myself waiting one more day would make it easier." His voice wasn't defensive. It sounded filled with regret, and somehow that made the situation even more painful. At the same time, another story was unfolding without either of us knowing. The person waiting to meet us had been putting together small pieces of a puzzle for weeks. Missed calls. Unfinished conversations. Changes in routine that didn't quite make sense. None of those things proved anything on their own, but together they created questions that refused to disappear. By the time we reached our destination, the sun had almost disappeared below the horizon. The parking lot was nearly empty, making the place feel even quieter. One familiar car was already waiting. My heartbeat quickened as someone stepped out and looked directly toward us. The expression on their face wasn't angry. It was calm, and somehow, that calmness felt far more unsettling than any confrontation could have been. For a few long seconds, nobody moved. The evening air felt unusually still, and even the sound of distant traffic seemed to fade into the background. The person standing beside the car took a slow breath before walking toward us. There was no raised voice, no dramatic accusation, only a quiet determination that made the moment feel even heavier. It was clear they hadn't come looking for an argument. They had come looking for the truth. Adam stepped forward first, but the words caught in his throat. I had never seen him struggle to speak before. He opened his mouth, paused, and looked down at the ground. The confidence that had always defined him was gone, replaced by the weight of decisions he could no longer avoid. I've been trying to understand what's changed, the other person said calmly. People don't grow distant without a reason. Their voice wasn't filled with anger. It carried disappointment, and that was far more difficult to hear. They explained how little moments had started to stand out, missed conversations, unusual silence, and the feeling that something important was being left unsaid. None of those moments proved anything on their own, but together they had created a question that refused to disappear. I realized then that this wasn't just about one message or one misunderstanding. It was about trust that had slowly become fragile. Everyone standing there had their own version of the story, their own fears, and their own regrets. No one wanted to believe the worst, yet no one could ignore the growing distance between us. Adam reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. He stared at the screen for a moment before turning it toward us. Before anyone says another word, he whispered, "There's something you both need to see." Neither of us knew what was on that screen. But judging by the look in Adam's eyes, whatever came next would change every relationship in ways none of us were prepared for. Adam's hand shook slightly as he unlocked the phone. Instead of opening a conversation, he tapped on a folder labeled Drafts. There were dozens of unsent messages, each saved on a different date over the past several months. None of them had ever reached anyone. He scrolled slowly, stopping on one that began with the words, "I should have been honest from the start." Another read, "I'm afraid telling the truth will hurt everyone." There were no dramatic confessions, only pages filled with hesitation, regret, and the struggle to say what had been weighing on him for so long. The silence grew heavier as each of us realized what we were looking at. Adam hadn't been hiding a single moment. He had been carrying an emotional burden that became larger every time he chose not to speak. Every draft represented another opportunity to clear the air, another chance to stop misunderstandings before they grew into something much bigger. Instead, fear had convinced him to wait, believing tomorrow would always be easier than today. The other person looked at the screen without saying a word. Their expression softened for a moment, but it quickly changed back to uncertainty. "If you've wanted to explain all this for months," they asked quietly, "what stopped you every single time?" It was a simple question, yet Adam had no immediate answer. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't admitting you've made mistakes. It's admitting why you kept avoiding the conversation. Before anyone could continue, another phone buzzed. This time, it wasn't Adam's. The sound came from the pocket of the person standing beside him. They glanced at the screen, and the color drained from their face. For several seconds they didn't move, almost as if they hoped the message would disappear on its own. Finally, they looked up at both of us with eyes full of confusion. "I don't understand," they whispered. Without saying anything else, they turned the phone around so we could see it. The message was from someone neither Adam nor I had mentioned all evening. It simply read, "Before you believe anything tonight, make sure you know the whole story." No name had come up before. No one had hinted that another person was involved. Suddenly, every assumption we had made felt incomplete. The questions that had consumed us all day were no longer enough, because a new mystery had appeared. Whoever sent that message clearly knew details none of us had shared, and if they had been watching events unfold from the beginning, then everything we believed about this emotional relationship story might have been missing its most important piece. For a long moment, no one spoke. The message seemed to freeze everything around us. Adam looked genuinely confused, which told me he hadn't expected it either. The person beside him slowly scrolled up, hoping to find more information, but there was nothing else, no previous conversation, no explanation, just those single words asking us not to reach conclusions too quickly. A few seconds later, another message appeared from the same sender. "I'll be there in 2 minutes." We turned toward the entrance of the parking lot as a small car pulled in and stopped a short distance away. A woman stepped out, holding a folder tightly against her chest. She walked toward us with careful steps, looking nervous but determined. When she finally reached us, she looked at Adam first. "I'm sorry for interrupting," she said quietly. "But if I don't explain this now, all of you will keep blaming yourselves for the wrong reasons." She introduced herself as someone Adam had been working with on a community project for several months. During that time, Adam had often talked about how distant everyone had become, how simple misunderstandings were growing into bigger problems because no one wanted to have difficult conversations. The folder she carried wasn't filled with secrets about a hidden relationship. It contained notes for a support workshop they had been planning together, one focused on rebuilding trust, improving communication, and helping families reconnect after emotional conflicts. Adam lowered his head. "I should have told all of you," he admitted. "I thought I could finish everything first and explain it when the time was right. Instead, my silence created stories that were never true." The words hung in the air. No one argued because, in that moment, everyone realized how easily unanswered questions can become painful assumptions. Weeks of doubt, fear, and emotional distance had been built on incomplete information rather than honest conversation. Just as the tension finally began to ease, the woman opened the folder and pulled out one last envelope. "I almost forgot," she said. "This was supposed to be delivered tomorrow." Adam stared at the handwriting on the front before carefully opening it. Inside was a letter written months earlier by someone who had quietly watched the growing distance between all of us. The final line stopped everyone in their tracks. "The hardest truth isn't that people stop caring. It's that they stop talking." None of us could change the months that had already passed. But standing there together, we understood that trust isn't only broken by betrayal. Sometimes it fades through silence, misunderstanding, and the stories we create when we don't ask the questions that matter most. And that lesson would stay with every one of us long after that unforgettable night came to an end. None of us rushed to leave after that. The parking lot that had felt so tense only a few minutes earlier became the place where we finally had the conversations we should have had months before. There were no dramatic speeches and no perfect apologies that erased the past. Instead, there were honest words, long pauses, and the willingness to listen without interrupting. For the first time in a long while, everyone spoke openly about what they had been feeling instead of hiding behind silence. Adam admitted that he had convinced himself he was protecting everyone by keeping his plans private. The more he delayed the conversation, the harder it became to explain. What began as a simple decision to wait for the right time slowly turned into weeks of uncertainty. Looking back, he realized that honesty delivered early would have been far less painful than silence stretched over months. It was a lesson he knew he would never forget. The rest of us also accepted our share of responsibility. We had filled the empty spaces with assumptions instead of questions. We had allowed fear to speak louder than trust. Every unanswered message, every quiet moment, and every unusual change in routine had become part of a story we created in our own minds. Once those assumptions took hold, it became difficult to see anything else. That realization was uncomfortable, but it was necessary. Over the following weeks, the relationships that had been strained slowly began to heal. Trust did not return overnight, and no one expected it to. It was rebuilt through small actions, honest conversations, shared time together, and a commitment to speak openly even when the truth felt difficult. Those simple choices mattered far more than grand promises ever could. The community workshop that Adam and his colleague had been preparing eventually took place. Ironically, the experience that almost pulled everyone apart became the reason the event felt so meaningful. Instead of speaking only from theory, they shared what they had learned about communication, emotional misunderstandings, and the importance of asking questions before reaching conclusions. Their story reminded others that relationships are strengthened not by perfection but by honesty, patience, and respect. When I think back to that first message, I couldn't take it all, Adam. But I still wanted more. I understand it differently now. It wasn't about wanting more secrets or more confusion. It was about wanting more honesty, more understanding, and more courage to speak before silence could create distance. If this emotional relationship story leaves you with one lesson, let it be this: trust is built through everyday conversations, not extraordinary moments. A single honest discussion can prevent months of misunderstanding. Sometimes the greatest challenge isn't uncovering a hidden truth, it's finding the courage to ask, to listen, and to believe in the people we care about before fear writes the ending for us. And with that lesson, one difficult chapter finally came to a close, opening the door to a future built on honesty instead of assumptions.